You know the drill, right? You go to a new website or you download a new app and immediately, bam.
Right, the giant banner.
Exactly. This giant banner just completely blocks your screen. There's this wall of tiny text, a hyperlink to a privacy policy that, let's be honest, nobody on earth has ever actually read.
Never.
And a big, bright button that just says, I accept. And I mean, what do? You click it.
Yeah, you just want to get to the article.
Right. You click it mindlessly just to get it out of the way so you can buy your shoes or read your news. It's a reflex. But that era of the mindless click, it is officially over.
Oh, it really is.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the DPDPA 2023, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act. And it is about to completely rewire the internet as we know it, turning that simple click into a legally binding contract.
And handing you, the user, a universal remote to wipe your data from the web.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how massive this shift is, we first have to look at how the law is redefining the very word consent. It's shifting from, just a technical feature on a website to a rock-solid legal agreement.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is the sheer recalibration of power.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are moving away from consent being just a technical hurdle for companies to jump over.
Right.
Under this act, it becomes a formal agreement between you, who the law actually calls the data principal,
okay,
and the company, which is called the data fiduciary.
Mm.
So essentially, any tech company, app, or website hoarding our information is now a data fiduciary.
I really want to emphasize this shift because it changes the fundamental mechanics of the internet. Like under the old system, clicking I accept is like a casual digital handshake.
Yeah.
You walk into a store, someone hands you a flyer on the street, you just nod and you keep walking.
You don't even look at it.
Exactly. But under the DPDPA, it's treated much more like contract law. There has to be an offer and an acceptance.
Yeah, man.
The offer is the notice that the company gives you. And the acceptance is your clear affirmative action to say yes to that very specific notice.
Exactly. The offer can technically be structured as a request for offer, but fundamentally it requires mutual promises that are documented as a verifiable agreement.
Verifiable being the key word there.
Yes. And that brings us to the notice itself. This is where the concept of informed consent finally gets its teeth. A company cannot just throw up a banner that says, we collect your data to improve our services.
Which is what they all say right now.
Right. But that vague language is dead. The notice must contain precisely what personal data is being requested and the exact granular purpose for which it is being used.
Wait, so when I open an app, they have to lay all of that out, like right there?
Yeah, and it's an extensive list. Beyond just the data and the purpose, the notice has to explain exactly how you can exercise your rights. It must tell you the exact process for making a formal complaint to the Data Protection Board, or DPB. It also has to provide the direct business contact details of their data protection officer, the DPO, or a grievance redressal officer.
That is... transparency is no longer just a best practice for PR. It's a strict legal requirement.
Absolutely.
Okay, but here is where I see a massive collision with reality.
Oh.
Yeah. Under these new rules, these notices must be accessible in English and any language specified in the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution.
Right, that's 22 languages.
That's 22 different languages. Think about, a small startup trying to launch an app. Having to present complex legal notices in 22 languages right on the entry screen feels like a gigantic barrier.
It is a huge barrier.
And let's be real here. Companies are notoriously lazy. They aren't going to hire top-tier legal translators for all 22 languages.
No, they'll look for shortcuts.
Exactly. They're going to run it through some cheap AI translation tool, and the Marathi or Kannada will be completely butchered, and users still won't know what they're actually agreeing to. So how does the law prevent that?
Well, that is a very real friction point. And it's precisely why UI design, user interface design, and accessibility are suddenly becoming major, heavily audited compliance issues.
So it's not just about making the app look pretty anymore.
Not at all. The core mandate of the Act is that consent must be truly informed. If an AI translation is incomprehensible, then the consent based on it is legally invalid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If a user only speaks Kannada and the legal notice is garbled, they literally cannot give informed consent. So the presentation architecture, like where the acceptance button is placed, how the rights links are displayed, the quality of the multilingual support, all of it has to be completely re-engineered by these companies.
Because if they screw it up?
If they use a cheap AI translation and a user complains to the Data Protection Board that they were misled, the company is fully liable.
Which brings up the back end of all this. Because if the burden of proof is entirely on the companies now, a simple yes in 22 languages isn't enough.
Right.
If consent is a strict contract, how do they actually prove it was you who clicked it? Like, let's say I dispute that I ever gave a fitness app permission to track my location. What happens then?
Well, this is where the evidentiary burden completely flips.
Yeah.
Historically, it was on you to prove a company misused your data.
Which was nearly impossible.
Exactly. But now, in any proceeding where consent is the basis of processing your data, the burden of proof lies entirely with the data fiduciary. They are legally obliged to prove that a valid notice was given to you and that you gave your consent in strict accordance with the act.
So if a regulator knocks on their door, a company can't just show them a screenshot of their website with an I accept button and say, look, they clicked this.
Not at all. A button click on a screen is just a front-end visual. What regulators will demand is the back-end proof.
What does that look like?
Verifiable audit trails, server logs, time-stamped records of exactly what version of the multilingual notice you saw when you clicked. There must be what the law calls suitable support documentation.
The mechanics of that sound incredibly rigorous. Every time I give consent, it has to be stored with a unique ID, and that unique ID has to be linked to a process ID.
Correct.
So to translate that for a second, it's essentially a digital receipt.
A digital receipt, yeah.
Like if I go to a coffee shop and buy a latte, they don't just take my money. They hand me a receipt with the transaction ID. And if the milk is sour, I bring the receipt back to prove we had an agreement. The unique ID is my receipt for my data, which allows me to basically return my consent later.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And just like a retail system, this requires full lifecycle management on the company's end.
Right.
They have to establish rules for the expiry of that consent and highly secure procedures for deletion or archival. They need a prospective approach.
Meaning they have to plan ahead.
Exactly. They have to determine exactly how long they need the data and if they are using any third-party data processors long before they ever collect a single byte of your information.
And having that digital receipt is crucial for what I think is probably the most powerful tool this law gives you, the withdrawal rule.
Oh, absolutely.
The Act states that you have the right to withdraw your consent at any time, and this is the kicker. The ease of doing so must be comparable to the ease with which you gave it.
Yes, because historically, companies have completely weaponized dark patterns.
Oh, tell me about it. It takes one tap to subscribe to a service, right? But then you have to navigate like 5 hidden menus, fill out a form in triplicate, and wait 3 business days to unsubscribe.
Exactly. The DPDPA makes that entirely illegal. If it took 1 click to opt in, it must take 1 click to opt out.
But there's a fascinating paradox here when it comes to withdrawing consent.
What's that?
Well, if a company makes it super easy to click I accept without verifying who you actually are up front, you literally cannot exercise your withdrawal rights later.
Precisely. Because if the consent is an agreement from a verifiable data principle, and the company does not have reliable mechanisms for identifying you when you return, how can they prove it is actually you asking to withdraw it?
Right. Like anyone could just delete my account.
Exactly. The authentication principle is a two-way street. It protects your data from being accessed or deleted by bad actors or trolls, sure. But it also means the company must have rock-solid verification processes in place from the very first interaction.
They can't just scrape anonymous data and figure it out later.
No, they can't.
Okay, so they have to build these massive, airtight, multilingual verification systems for every new user starting today. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, what about the data they already have?
Yes, the legacy data.
Yeah, I'm talking about the stuff you gave them back in like 2015. Back when we were all just mindlessly clicking those old non-compliant banners. Do companies just get to keep that old data forever because it's grandfathered in?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where it becomes an absolute operational nightmare for tech companies.
I bet.
A completely clean slate for the internet is impossible, and the Act recognizes this. But it definitely doesn't give companies a free pass.
Okay, so what do they have to do?
For legacy personal data, where you already gave some form of consent before the Act commenced, companies must notify you as soon as reasonably practicable.
Notify me of what?
They have to tell you the specific purpose for which your old data is currently being processed, how you can exercise your new rights under the DPDPA, and how you can complain to the DPB.
Wow. Okay, just think about the sheer scale of that for a second.
It's massive.
If you've been using a social media platform for 10 years, they have petabytes of unstructured data on you. They now have to sift through all of that, figure out why they still have it, and send you a very detailed notice explaining exactly what they've been doing with a decade's worth of your life.
Yes. And there is a grace period built into the mechanics of the law. A data fiduciary may continue to process that legacy data until you actively withdraw your consent.
But wait, if I get that notice tomorrow from an app I've used for years and I hit withdraw, what happens to all the processing they already did? Did they suddenly become legally liable for the past 10 years?
No. The law is pragmatic here. The rules state that the withdrawal of consent shall not affect the legality of the processing that happened before the withdrawal.
Okay, so the past actions remain legal.
Right. But the moment you withdraw, the current processing must stop immediately. Furthermore, the consequences of that withdrawal are borne by you.
What does that mean?
Well, if you withdraw consent for a banking app to process your financial data, the consequence is that the app will immediately stop working for you.
Oh, I see.
You bear that functional consequence, but the power to actually pull the plug is entirely in your hands.
I love having that power, but I have to be honest, this sounds incredibly exhausting.
It does.
If every single app, website, e-commerce store, and digital service I use has to send me a multilingual notice, and I have to individually manage my unique IDs and manually track my own withdrawal rights across hundreds of platforms.
That's a lot.
I wouldn't do it. The cognitive load on the user would be insane. It would just become the new version of the mindless click.
You've hit on the exact reason why the DPDPA introduces a brand new entity to do the heavy lifting for you.
Oh, really?
Yes. Enter the consent manager. This is arguably one of the most innovative statutory concepts in the entire Act.
Okay, what is a consent manager?
A consent manager, or CM, is a specialized person or entity registered directly with the Data Protection Board. They act as a single point of contact to enable you to give, manage, review, and withdraw your consent through an accessible, transparent, and interoperable platform.
Okay, so earlier I called this a universal remote control for your digital privacy, but based on how you just described the mechanics, it's actually more like a digital bouncer.
A bouncer. I like that.
Yeah, like you don't have to talk to the apps individually anymore. The apps have to talk to your consent manager. And your consent manager checks your VIP list before letting them in.
Exactly.
You log into one dashboard, you see every single company you've given data to, and you can just flip a switch to revoke access from anyone instantly. The consent manager acts on your behalf and is legally accountable to you.
That bouncer analogy is spot on.
Okay.
Because it highlights the protective layer the CM provides. And this isn't just a theoretical idea. It's a formal entity registered under Section 6 of the Act and its accompanying rules. But we need to make an important distinction here.
Okay.
Because people often confuse consent managers under the DPDPA with account aggregators.
Right. Because when you look at the DPDPA architecture, the data empowerment and protection architecture that India has been building, account aggregators are a huge part of that. And they sound like they do the exact same thing as a consent manager. What is the actual mechanical difference?
Well, they are similar in that they both handle consent, but they are fundamentally different in scope and duration.
How?
According to the DPDPA architecture, an account aggregator, or AA, is primarily used in the financial sector. An AA provides consent at a very specific, limited time, usually when a customer is being onboarded, to fetch financial data from a provider and transmit it to a user.
So, for example, securely sharing your bank statements with a loan app to get approved for a mortgage.
Exactly. It's highly transactional.
Got it. So account aggregators are highly specialized, mostly for securely moving your financial data from point A to point B during a sign-up process.
Right. But a consent manager under the DPDPA is far broader and continuous. A CM needs to provide and manage consent for an innumerable number of services and purposes over a lifetime.
Wow. Okay.
It is not just financial. It is your healthcare records, your e-commerce habits, your social media footprint, your education data. It is a fully interoperable platform that sits continuously between you and every data fiduciary out there.
That's huge.
In fact, the privacy policies of companies now have to explicitly state whether their websites are enabled to receive consent through these registered consent managers.
I mean, that digital bouncer concept is brilliant. It empowers adults to make these complex privacy choices efficiently without getting overwhelmed. But what about the users who cannot legally consent for themselves?
Oh, yes. The minors.
Yeah, a huge portion of the internet is used by kids. How does the law protect them when they are fundamentally incapable of entering into these strict legal contracts?
The DPDPA applies very strict obligations regarding the personal data of minors, which is defined as anyone under 18 and also persons with disabilities who have a lawful guardian.
Okay.
In these cases, the data fiduciary must obtain verifiable consent directly from the parent or the lawful guardian before any processing begins. But the protection goes much, much deeper than just getting a parent to click a button on a notice.
Yes, because there are some hard prohibitions here. Companies are strictly banned from undertaking any processing of personal data that is likely to cause any detrimental effect on the well-being of a child. But the real game changer, the thing that disrupts the entire business model of the web, is the ban on monitoring. Companies shall not undertake tracking, behavioral monitoring, or targeted advertising directed at children.
And this creates an incredible operational paradox for tech companies. I mean, the entire economic model of the modern web is built on behavioral monitoring and targeted advertising. Banning this entirely for a huge segment of the population is a massive shift.
But wait, here is my pushback on that.
Go ahead.
How does a company know a user is a child without inherently tracking them to find out? Like, if I open YouTube or Instagram, the only way the algorithm knows I'm 14 is by monitoring my behavior, the videos I watch, and the data I generate.
Right.
If tracking kids is banned, how do they enforce it without tracking everyone to verify their age?
This raises an important question, and it is the ultimate catch-22 of digital privacy. The law tries to address it pragmatically through exemptions.
Oh, exemptions. Okay.
Yeah, it isn't just a blanket rule that destroys functionality. The app notes that certain data fiduciaries may be exempted based on their purpose. For example, child counseling services or schools.
Right.
These are entities where processing child data is inherently necessary for their well-being and education.
So a school's digital portal isn't going to get shut down just because it tracks the student's grades.
Exactly. Furthermore, the government has the power to notify a cutoff age above which these strict restrictions might be waived.
Assuming the platform is safe, right?
Yes, provided the data fiduciary operates in a manner that is verifiably safe and has satisfactory security measures in place.
So if an educational platform has rock-solid security, the government might say, okay, for this specific platform, the tracking restrictions on 16 and 17-year-olds are waived, allowing the platform to actually function.
Precisely. It shows the law is trying to balance absolute protection with functional reality.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening to this right now? If we zoom out from the legal text, the back-end server logs, and the unique IDs, the big picture is incredibly clear. Your personal data is no longer a free-for-all buffet for tech companies.
Not anymore.
It has transitioned into a heavily regulated asset. We are moving away from meaningless checkboxes into a world of verifiable agreements.
Verifiable being the operational word.
Yes. We are talking about mandatory notices available in 22 languages, the burden of proof resting entirely on the companies, and the rise of universal consent managers acting as your personal digital bouncer, giving you the leverage to easily withdraw access at any time. The DPDPA is finally handing you the remote control to your digital life.
It is a profound shift in digital rights. I mean, the days of companies silently hoarding legacy data for a decade or tracking minors with total impunity are closing. They are now accountable to verifiable, audited consent, and the penalties for failing to provide those digital receipts will be severe.
But there is one specific detail in the law that leaves us with a fascinating cliffhanger.
There is.
It's a tiny concept called legitimate use, and you just have to wonder about the psychology of these tech giants. If getting legal, documented 22-language consent from a user is becoming this incredibly difficult, strict, and legally risky, will companies eventually just stop asking you altogether?
It's a real possibility.
Will they stop relying on consent and start searching for loopholes under this ambiguous legitimate use category to process your data without needing your permission at all? It makes you wonder. The next time you visit a website and you don't see an I accept banner, is it because they stopped tracking you? Or because they found a way to do it legally without ever asking?